that matters greatly to me. What I'm here to share with you tonight is a deceptively simple tool that became a lighthouse for me during one of the darkest storms of my life. And as Francesca said, I have just been helping to facilitate a 3-day event for the BC Wildfire Service, and these firemen just got off the line and they had a tough season. You know, they had a really tough season. They're worn out, they're tired, and it was a heavy lift. And they were looking at me like, what are you doing here? You know, who are you? So I had to share a little bit with them about what I know about trauma. And I told them that when I left my first marriage that my husband tried to murder me and then went to prison for that. And all of a sudden I had their attention. They're like, okay, she's one of us, she knows. And that was before I was giving my talk the next day. And so what I said to them was, I wish that was the darkest storm of my life, but it wasn't. So the child from that marriage, when he became a teenager, it became apparent at a very young age, like 13, 14, that he wasn't just experimenting with drugs and alcohol, he was caught, like he was addicted. It was gonna be a problem. And like every parent in that situation, I was terrified. And I tried everything that I could to stop it. I sent him to counselors, we involved the school, at times we involved the authorities, we called on every spiritual teacher we knew. I tried tough love, I tried love, I tried no love, I tried no talk to me, I did all the things and nothing worked. It was literally like a freight train just heading downhill with no brakes and no end in sight. It was gonna crash. And it kept going. And for those of you who know anything about addiction, it doesn't just affect the addict. Addiction is somewhat like having a nuclear bomb dropped in the center of your family. It devastates everything in its path. And so besides me running around trying to manage him and control him and keep him out of jail and keep him from dying, I was being woken up by the cops in the middle of the night on a regular basis, having to go get him out of the cells on a regular basis. I was once chased by gangsters who were trying to collect a debt from my son and then had to be followed by undercover police officers for weeks so the gangsters didn't kill me because of my son's addiction. So it got crazy. And despite all of my efforts, it also affected his brothers, his grandparents, his friends, the teachers, everywhere. It was just massive destruction everywhere. The aftermath of addiction is literally comparable to a nuclear bomb. So we all fought against it. We all tried our best to help him, but we mostly were just sad, angry, and desperate a lot of the time, and it was exhausting. And then my worst nightmare happened. I discovered that my son, when he was 18 years old, was an IV injecting heroin addict. I crumpled to the floor. I didn't know what to do. And I thought, I've lost the battle. Like my son, I've lost the battle because statistically, it's in the single digits how many people recover from that. So I tried my best to stay hopeful. But let me tell you that hope is a very fragile thing when you have fought and prayed for years for your child's recovery, and there's just no hope, like no change on the horizon. I was exhausted, I was scared, and there was a very real possibility that I wouldn't be spared what so many other mothers weren't spared. I knew that I wasn't special. I knew that with the opioid crisis as it is and the toxic drug supply as it is, that my son could die at any moment. So, as his addiction worsened and things got dire, I had to face the fact that my son could and probably would die. here's the thing. The worst times are often the catalysts for the greatest transformation and growth. So as Nick, my son, battled his demons, I confronted my own. I had been controlling and fighting and resisting, and it wasn't working. I had to do something different. I was in an argument with reality. I don't want my son to be an addict. Well, guess what? He is. And this argument with reality was getting me nowhere. So what I decided was, with the real possibility of losing my son hanging over my head, that I needed to look into my heart and say, like, what do I really want in my life? What do I want? And I want my son to know that he's known and loved and cared for, and he doesn't have to be different than he is to get that love, because he might not be here tomorrow. And for myself, I wanted some peace, because I was tired of chasing him around and trying to manage his life. But in order to get those things, I was gonna have to let go of a lot of stuff. I had to let go of blame and shame and generational stigma and preconceived notions about what addiction is. And I would have to let go of trying to control what I couldn't control. I would have to let go of trying to fix it for him. And most of all, I'd have to let go of managing other people's perceptions of what I was doing to fix my son, and managing other people's perceptions of my son and my family. And the most important thing that I had to let go of, you guys, was asking the same fucking stupid questions that get you nowhere. I had been asking, why is this happening? Whose fault is it? I'm pretty sure it's his dad's. And when will it be over? None of those questions got me anywhere, like nowhere. So I did a little excavating, and I asked a new question. I thought, if I want peace and I want my son to know that he's loved, and these are my only two things I need to worry about, what's the best question I can ask? And this question was simple, but it was profound. I asked, what does it look like just to love him? What does it look like just to love him? And when I asked that question, it altered how I showed up for him, and it altered our relationship, because I was no longer responsible for cleaning up his messes or trying to fix him. I could just listen to him. I could nurture and nourish our relationship. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes just loving him looked like hanging up the phone. Sometimes just loving him looked like stifling a sob after he told me he'd been beat up and robbed and hit in the head with a brick. And just saying, I'm sorry that's happening to you, and I love you. But not needing to go and clean it all up for him. But what I knew for sure was that connection is the cure for everything that ails us. Connection is what's missing whenever we're ill. We're either disconnected from self, disconnected from others, disconnected from source. And so connection was one thing I had control over. I could nourish and nurture that. And even as my son's addiction continued to worsen, our relationship strengthened. Our relationship got better, even as his addiction worsened. And I was like, well, I'm doing what I can, and I have some peace with that. Now, towards the end of my son's addiction, it was extremely dire. He was in psychosis every time he used. He would take light bulbs out and say, Mom, they're listening to me. They're coming to get me. And he's crawling across the floor, asking me to turn lights off because people are going to shoot him through the window. So clearly he couldn't be in my home. He was living in the bush. He was living on the streets. And I knew that the end was near, because he was not going to be able to take care of himself. He had always been strong and savvy, and now his mind failed him. He was not going to be able to take care of himself for much longer. So I literally prepared myself for the call every day. So fast forward a little bit, and about 2 months ago, my son was home visiting. He's 30 now, and he was home visiting. And we sat up late into the night talking. And it became very clear to me that he's not just surviving, but he's thriving. He's been clean and sober for 16 months. He has a beautiful girlfriend who's also in recovery. Her name's Shelby, and we adore her. He has a puppy named Teddy Bear. He's a Pomeranian. He's so cute. And he's a barber in New Westminster, and he's very successful and well-liked, and he's part of a transformative, sober living community. He has friends. I'm like, you have friends? Oh my God, he has friends. It's amazing. And I asked him, I said, Nick, what was the difference? Like, he's been to treatment, you guys, 13 times. He almost bankrupted me. 13 times my kid went to treatment. And he said, you know what, Mom? What was different was I asked a new question. So imagine this scene. Just a few weeks after he got into the last chance treatment center that he begged and pleaded to get into when he was in psychosis because he knew the end was coming, he relapsed and they kicked him out. The system is very broken, folks. We know that relapse is part of the disease, so why do we kick people to the curb? They do that. They kicked him out. He's now sleeping in a park in New Westminster with drugs as his only companion. He's completely despondent, and he actually said to me, Mom, I didn't care if I lived or died. I kept overdosing, and they kept bringing me back, and I was mad. I wish they would have just left me. Thankfully, a gentleman from the sober living community who knew Nick from the meetings showed up, and he said, hey man, what happened? And Nick said, I relapsed, so they kicked me to the curb. And he said, you know what? I work at this sober living place down the street, and it's owned by this wonderful couple named Ronnie and Lara. They're doing things differently. They are a family. They bring you right in their home with them. They help you work through things. If I could get you in there, would you want to go? Nick checked his social calendar, which didn't have a lot on it, so he was game. He said, okay. So Ronnie, who owned the house, asked around about Nick to see who he was going to bring into his home. And this is what he heard. He's hopeless. He's a lost cause. He's trouble. He's never gonna make it, and you're wasting your time. Let me tell you a little something about Ronnie. Ronnie was a United States Marine who saw action in Afghanistan and came home with his own addiction, and he was also a lost cause on the street with no hope, and someone believed in him. And Ronnie loves an underdog. The more they said he was hopeless, the more Ronnie said, that's my guy. I'm bringing him home with me. So he brought Nick home, and the very first night Nick was there, his addiction tendencies started to come up. Everyone in the house had gone out with the exception of one worker. And Nick was laying in bed going through withdrawal. And he started getting the looping that addicts get. If I just get a little bit of dope, it's gonna be okay. All this pain will stop. I'll pack up my backpack, I'll sell a few things. I don't know what he had to sell, but I'll sell a few things and then I'll sneak back in. So he slung his backpack over his shoulder and he walked to the door of his bedroom and he put his hand on the door frame and he said to me, Mom, I felt tired that I've never felt in my entire life. And I looked down at my feet and I thought, what am I doing? And then Nick asked a couple of questions that would transform his life and start his healing journey. What if I stayed? And what if I prayed? And you know what? He did stay. And he did pray. And he said, when I woke up in the morning, something was different, Mom. I didn't want to disappoint Ronnie. I called him and I told him, I might get kicked out, but I want to be honest with you. I almost left last night. And Ronnie's a real rough around the edges guy. He's like, hey, motherfucker, that's the best news ever. Now I can help you, man. Like, you told the truth. You're ready for recovery. And that was when Nick's journey really began. It wasn't always easy. He relapsed one more time in the first couple of days that he was there. And instead of kicking them out, they operated from the same mantra that I did. What would it look like just to love him? So they loved him through it. They helped him through it. There was a time when he got in a fist fight with one of the guys at the house over a girl, because boys are dumb. So they had a fist fight, and Nick's packing up his stuff. He's like, I guess I'm kicked out now. And Ronnie says, Or you could realize that sometimes men beat each other up and we could just work through it. And now Nick is best friends with his friend Dan. Anyways, what I want to get across tonight is this. That it wasn't any external thing that helped me, and it wasn't an external thing that helped Nick. We each asked a new question that changed everything. I got clear that I wanted peace and that I wanted my son to be loved, and I asked, what would it look like to love him? And that started my healing journey. Nick got clear that he wanted to get better, and he asked, what if I stayed, and what if I prayed? And that saved his life. So my question to you is, in any area where you're stuck in your life, where are you asking limiting questions like, why is this happening to me? And what if you took a moment, a deep breath and a pause, and asked yourself, what do I really want? What do I need to give up? And what's one thing I can do towards that thing I want to lead me closer to freedom? We have a list of 100 questions that can change your life. And if anyone's interested in getting that list, I didn't want to stand up here and read them all to you. Just follow me on Instagram at Pam Rader and just DM a question mark, and my assistant will send you a list of 100 questions that will change your life. We would love to do that for you. I hope that this sharing of a little bit of my journey inspires you to think about some new questions that you could ask, and I thank you all so much for being here for this wonderful cause tonight.